What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. We're at it again with another video. This one's going to be highlighting my braking system. Now, we got started with my pedal assembly, so we've got my tilt and masters up front, but we should at least go over a little bit about what I'm actually putting on all four corners of my car. Case in point, I decided to go with an upgrade and we went with these Brembo monoblock racing calipers. Now, there's other options out there. This was just the package that we could get to work with the really small tire diameter or wheel diameter we're running with these stores. We just decided to keep it simple. We went with the standard Brembo racing pads. We've got this really low profile rotor with this beautiful hat. All this system was engineered by my buddy Andrew. Still super happy with the product. We're really excited to get it on the car. And once we actually get it on the car, we need to make sure that we get the hard lines and the soft lines done as well. So that's what we're going to be covering in this video. We've got to install the suspension, get all the calipers and all the parts in their respective locations, and then we've got to run lines to them. So that's what we're going to be up to next. So stick around and check out and see how we do it. So fortunately, we get to install the top plate permanently, or at least as permanently as we can until we need to go back in and service the diff bearings. That's why we have obviously got that recess cut out of both side plates so we could slip the diff out through the top if need be. Now we're using blue Loctite just because it's cheap insurance and making sure that the quarter 20 bolts don't loosen up, and it also protects them from corrosion. A little torque wrench goes a long way in me just buying myself some sanity. For those of you that have struggled with flathead fasteners before, I have swapped out all the flatheads on my rear spar for torque bits. I can't tell you how much easier it is to remove hardware when it's been stubborn with a torque pattern over the hex. I would highly recommend doing that if you're going to be doing any kind of upgrades to your store yourself. Notice the torque bits here. So now we get to install my rear TTX dampers for the first time. Fortunately, they're a little bit longer than the ST44s, but that's because my ST44s were a little bit too short for what the store recommends. Now, before some of you lose your marbles, yes, we're going to be replacing those rockers. That's just going to be in a later video. Now we get to slip in the front TTXs. We've been in and out with those a couple of times, but it's just nice to see both of them located. So now we get to start digging through my treasure trove of hardware and make sure we get the proper bolts for all the hardware I need. One of the beautiful things I didn't really understand until now is not having a solid floor on the car. The 4-piece store floor allows me to use real jet nuts and not have to do some sort of crafty little captive nut, because if I need to work on any of the pieces inside my spar, I can actually take the back floor off and service it on the car. We'll get to start hanging the suspension. We're going to start with the rear push rods and then go for the lower control arms. All the suspension is going to be temporarily hung on, and there's a reason. I still need to go back through and replace all the spherical rod ends on all these components. So we'll be making custom rear push rods when we make our custom front push rods, mainly because there's some adjusters that store have had in their push rods that have been known to fail, and rather than risk it, we're just going to make fully custom push rods. So now we get to start putting the suspension on the front of the car, and unfortunately the floors need to come off. We'll go over that here in a little bit because we actually need to cut clearance into the leading edge of the floors to make sure that the control arm passes through it. But right now we're just going to be hanging the lower control arms, installing the uppers, but we also need the orange strap, because the orange strap, as you can see, is going to take the place of the push rod. So one of the main obstacles I have for getting these hard lines to the back of the car is the tunnels and the back floor itself. It gets really narrow down there, and 90% of the challenge of what I'm going to be facing from here on out is packaging. So we're going to at least get clearances cut for the front of the floor to clear the A-arms, get those installed, and then install the tail and get an idea as to how much space I really have back there. So it's really hard for Sharpie to show up on carbon fiber, so that's why I like using blue tape as a way to mark out what I'm going to be doing. So we need to cut a channel, and then we need to clearance the outer edge, and that's going to allow the control arm to slip through this portion of the floor. Pretty easy job for a cutting wheel and a sanding disc, but I also use the drill to make sure that I've got rounded corners and not sharp edges. So one thing I should mention is I'm doing my best here to guess. Until we get the suspension into its final locating place, I'm not sure I cut enough. So I don't want to cut too much. I'd rather cut just enough for now, but those might need to become bigger cuts in the future. Now that we've got the tunnels back on the car, we can lift the car and get the rear engine tray underneath the car. And this is where I need to send my brake and my clutch lines. So even though my biggest challenge is going to be at the rear, we might as well take a quick second and start at the front. I'm going to install 2 cable tie clamps here, one to hold the clutch line and one to hold the brake line. Now, the clutch line, I'm still running to the same location as if I was running a foot pedal, but we're just gonna do a soft line and have that run up to my steering wheel location. Now that I've got those 2 in, I can zip tie in the leading edges of these 2 tubes, and you notice I had to put some bends in it to make sure it clears my steering rack. We're gonna put a cable tie at the back here too. That's gonna help make sure that those 2 rods stay in place, not only for the duration of my running of the car, but it also really helps make sure that they're located next to the tub for this process. So now that we terminated at the front, we get to work on the challenging portion at the rear. I wanted to bring the brakes onto the top of the frame just so I can make sure that both soft lines go to the left and the right of this frame. And that's because the one Achilles heel of the store is it's a chain drive. And I wanted to do everything I could to desperately avoid my brake lines running anywhere near the chain. Even though I'll be running one of my brake lines underneath the dry sump pan, it'll still be a lot safer to do that and risk the heat exposure than run it anywhere near where the chain could strike it. So even though getting to the point where I was happy with the bends at the back of the car took a lot of time, I'm really happy with how they turned out. But now I'm actually moving on to the part I'm scared of most. We've got to cut and flare the front ends of these tubes. So I don't know how I got this lucky, but it turns out my dad got a professional tube flaring kit. So I ended up cutting the tubing and using this amazing piece that I guess he got for $300 or $400. Now, it's got 3 operations that you do, but my gosh, does it do a brilliant job of perfectly flaring the ends of the tube. So this just made my scariest job a million times easier. So now that we're completely done with the flares, I'm just gonna zip tie everything into place, come back with the cable ties a little bit later. But that is a beautifully run set of hard lines for a store. Notice the jog for that fastener there. So as you can see, this is all my old stuff. We've got my old brake lines that ran basically from the inside of the car out to the calipers. We've got the old master cylinders, the feeds to them. We've got the old brake pressure or brake fluid reservoir actually, and the brake pressure sensors and the metering blocks and all that stuff. So basically we're at least gonna mock all this back up onto the car, get an idea as to how it all fits, and then we'll be able to order custom length hoses or any kind of additional fittings we need to make this work. So that's what we're gonna work on right now. So now that I've got the mating points for the hard lines, all I've gotta do is install them onto the calipers and measure the distances. Once I have those distances, it's just off to Summit Racing to order the finalized parts, or at least the parts I need to assemble the brake line. So even though the right rear is going to go underneath the dry sump pan, we are going to put some thermal barriers in between it and the pan. We'll get to that in a later video. So unfortunately, this is where we're going to leave it. The soft line components are going to take a little bit too long to come in, so we're just going to call this episode done and dusted. But we got the measurements and the quantities we needed for the fittings and the soft line, so everything's on order. We finalized location of the hard lines, and I'm really happy with how those turned out. We've got all the suspension, with the exception of the front push rods and steering arms, on the car. Everything fits. And more importantly, we 100%ed and finalized the rear spar, so it's not coming apart for the rest of the build. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you guys watching and learning hopefully something here. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. And if you're interested in seeing more, please subscribe. For now, have a great night. We'll see you at the next video.